Today is Donald Stacy's YouTube channel, where I'm been occupied reading a novel I've written, The Impressionist, about a would-be stand-up comic who actually succeeds for a time and then is overcome by the competition, perhaps, and returns to a former way of life. So, the memory card in my camera became full during the last episode or session, and it cut me off in the middle of the scene, so I'm going to go back to the beginning of it. Okay, one night Jack phoned Erica around 8 o'clock. He was in LA, just outside of Hollywood, working on the taping of a comedy series for Netflix. Jack was not in the cast, though there had been brief talk of that. No, with Jack having never acted in either high school or college theater, nor community theater for that matter, the producers thought it not only best but inevitable that Jack serve within the project as he'd originally been intended, as one of the contributing scriptwriters. This he could do, and do well. In fact, they soon discovered that at heart Jack had the makings of a playwright. They worked each day in the same large room with its odd assortment of furnishings, not the everyday sort of furnishings you would expect to find in an office. They had a weekly deadline to submit the script for the filming of the next episode. There would be 10 altogether. Jack had never worked as a member of a group or team before. Every job he'd had from the time he got out of high school, he worked alone. Dishwashing, manual labor jobs such as loading and unloading freight trucks. And then, of course, there were his disc jockey days, stuck in one broadcasting booth or another. The other 3 team members were all nearly a generation younger than he was, all of them in their mid-20s. During one of Jack's recent appearances at the Improv, he was passing the time talking to another comedian after both of them had been on stage. After critiquing one another's performance with a single compliment paired with a single piece of advice or helpful observation, the other fellow mentioned a 10-week scriptwriting gig he had been offered to take up, but he had a scheduling conflict, a prior obligation, so he could not accept the job. But he then said to Jack, "Well, you could take the position. You write good, stereotype-driven material just like I do. Your stuff is as good as mine, man, if not better." And then he said, "I'll mention your name. I'll give them your number if you like." After a moment of hesitation, Jack accepted his new friend's proposal, saying, "Fucking hell, man, why not?" And each day for a week now, he had been contributing ideas to the script for the first week's episode. The scriptwriter who carried the most sway in the room was the show's creator, Peter Railovich. The scaffolding of the meandering plot structure was, of course, the result of his brainwork, for lack of a better term, and together the 4 of them were now responsible for fleshing out Railovich's ideas as he himself led the others into and out of each successive scene. After 5 days of this intensive and often competitive work, Jack embraced the weekend like a lifebuoy, and now he was calling Erica. She answered the phone saying, "Hello, Jack. So, what's prompted you to call me this time? Do you want to talk to the kids?" "Sure, I'd like to do that, but there's something else I'd like to talk about first." "All right, well, what is it you wanted to tell me?" You'll never guess where I am, Erica. LA, Hollywood. You won't believe it. I can hardly believe it myself. I'm one of the script writers for a new comedy series Netflix is putting together. One of the producers is letting me stay in his guest house out in back of this fucking mansion he lives in, along with his wife and their 3 lapdogs. In a lackluster tone, she said, "That's great, Jack. I'm really, truly happy for you. You finally have the life you've always dreamed of." That she did not take an enthused interest in his new situation deflated Jack. He said, "Yeah, that's true enough in various ways." "Oh, Jack, I'm glad you called. There's something I need to tell you. Since you barely stay in touch with your father, you'd have no way of knowing. Me and the kids are living with him now in your old house on Baker Street." "What'd you just say? That you and my dad are living together?" "Yes, Jack, for more than 6 months. It's been close to a year now." Closer to a year. He was incredulous. "So, you're living with Theo?" "Yes, that's what I've been trying to tell you." "But you never liked my dad all that much. You thought he was always too much of a lowbrow." "Well, I found out he's far smarter than I ever realized." "Yeah, Dad's pretty fucking smart. He's also very kind and quite a doting grandfather. He's softened up a bit in his old age." "Well, I just love him. He's still very active. He doesn't seem old to me at all. He's always enjoyed good health. I can't remember him ever being sick. Anyway, I just thought you ought to know." "Sure. Well, I appreciate you've mentioned it. Thanks for telling me. The kids are happy. They're doing fine." "That's great, Erica. That's really great. Look, I need to go. These fucking film crews start the day early. Take care now." "Bye, Jack." "Take it easy, Erica. Bye now." Around this time, one evening after Bernie had gotten home from work, Sheila mentioned that Jack had called her just that very afternoon, and she told Bernie what Jack had said to her about his new job as a scriptwriter for some new comedy series Netflix was putting together. "No kidding," Bernie said, surprised. "Hey, that's really great. Next time you happen to talk to him, give him my congratulations. My hat's off to him, Sheila." "Well, sure, I'll tell him. He's worked so hard for this, Bernie, and maybe this even means that he's going to have steady work for a change. Maybe he's done being a comedian." "No, I'll bet he's going to press on with his stand-up routine. That's what he's always wanted, isn't it?" "Yeah, yes, that's for sure. But a relatively regular paycheck might be just enough for him to reconsider his priorities," she said. "Yeah, maybe," Bernie said as he felt a surge of envy rush through him. As soon as they had finished eating dinner, while Bernie set about clearing the table, Sheila went into the living room, lifted Patrick out of his playpen. Then she sat down in the armchair and began to feed him. Not long after that, the baby fell asleep, and she carried him into his room and lowered the little boy down into the bottom of his crib. She then remained there for a moment, listening to him breathe as he lay asleep on his back. She watched his face change expression now and again as he dreamed. "What are you dreaming about, little man?" she said quietly. A moment later, she returned to the living room. She looked at Bernie, still not done cleaning up in the kitchen. He was wiping down the stove. "Bernie, what kind of movie do you want to watch tonight?" He glanced up at her and said, "I made a New Year's resolution, Sheila, to cut back on watching TV." "So, does that mean you don't care what movie I see?" "That's about it, sweetheart. I've been meaning to catch up on my reading." For far too long, he thought, I've let myself become diverted and absorbed by the films I choose to watch on TV. In the past, I leaned on the rationale that movies served as the basis of the way I earn a living. But even now, I don't regard watching 2 films a day as excessive. After watching so many of them over the years, you come to have an intuitive grasp of which genre one film or another falls into within the first minute of viewing. Yet, despite the advent of the personal computer followed by that of the internet and later the ubiquitous smartphone, the essence of human experience hasn't changed. There still remains a variance, at times considerable, between perception and recollection. And therefore, ambiguity continues to be woven through the lives of people and always will be, regardless of the ever-mounting clamor for 100% absolute certainty. We live in an era where a great range of behaviors has become quantified, collective behavior foremost. And I believe a growing number of people have come to sense the uncanny nature of these sweeping innovations within social reality, or what has been called the life world. Then, with little or no connection to the previous idea, Bernie took regard of the fact that despite the ever-increasing number of films produced each year, there still remained only a small fraction of the nationwide workforce dedicated to film production, and particularly the sizable coterie of Hollywood actors, many with whom we're all quite familiar. But, thought Bernie, that we're living in a competitive celebrity culture, obsessed with the notion of success, not of merely getting ahead, is hardly news. The society of the future will arise out of the social structures already in place during this present time. A person's involvement, reliance, and dependence upon electronic devices will surely only increase. Warfare will become only further infused with technological sophistication, novelty, inventions to snuff out human life, ever more numerous, varied, and efficient. After a pause during which he was not conscious of any thought in particular, Bernie began to reflect on the obvious fact movies and the cinema have an ongoing and deep, palpable influence over the lives of all of us. And because free speech is the law of the land in America, the eerie extremities of human experience can be openly and thoroughly portrayed. And though the film industry was required by law to come up with an age-related rating scheme, these tags of suitability for children's various age groups does not prevent a 9-year-old boy, for example, from getting his hands on a DVD with an R18+ mature rating, nor would it prevent him from watching a streaming version of the same film, issued as it is, infused as it is, with scenes of protracted gun violence and erotic lovemaking. But the film viewing habits of Americans and its quantifications have grown far more granular with much greater specificity. And all this data is stored in and maintained by a regiment of industrial-sized mainframe computers owned by corporations of astronomical wealth, such as Google, Amazon, and Meta, aka Facebook. After Justine had driven alone onto the southbound freeway to Seattle, for Deborah had not wanted to go along for the ride, nor did she want to meet any of Justine's friends who happened to live there and just recently had a baby. Justine, really, why would I ever want to go to Seattle to meet these people you know? You may have spoken about them from time to time, but after all, I don't even know them, and probably would never see them again anyway. And don't worry about poor old Achilles. I'll feed him, I promise. Mother, you don't need to do that. He'll be fine one day without any food. Oh, for heaven's sake. The beast would be pestering me all day and night to be fed. So you go to Seattle and enjoy yourselves. Achilles and I will be just fine. Won't we, you silly old thing? But the irritation she felt toward her mother having now subsided, she then happened to recall the YouTube video she watched just the previous night where Carl Sagan, in 1985, came before a Senate investigating committee to testify about the root cause of the atmosphere's greenhouse effect, which he said was something of a misnomer, perhaps having had the physics of an actual greenhouse in mind, yet then conceded that this label was apt enough to describe the process underway, with humankind's continuous and ever-increasing introduction of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. The whole world has stalled for so long to even face this problem, she thought, let alone to actually do something about it. And then a mood close to despair fell upon her, and tears began to well up in her eyes. Oh, why does it have to be this way forever, she thought. The roof of our house is on fire, and all we can do is keep burning oil and coal and gasoline and natural gas because that's all we've ever known how to do for the last 150 years. For God's sake. God, a word of utmost deception. The insidious invention of fearful people inflicted and deluded by superstition. Thousands of years ago. Yes, she thought, monotheism was quite the invention, and at least in thought liberated the chosen people from further subjugation by the numerous Egyptian gods. Then later, several centuries later, the city-state of Rome gained increasing strength and sent its armies further and further from the shores of Italy and came to occupy much of the Middle East. And for the Roman Emperor Caesar, a man called Jesus had become a political liability with his ravings of a so-called kingdom in heaven. Everyone knew that the Elysian fields were reserved for only the lucky few after their deaths, while the great remainder were summarily sent by Jupiter himself to Hades, the dark god, Pluto's vast subterranean realm, where the lost, the criminal, the poor, and the mad all go to suffer their final miserable existence for eternity.